As everyone scrambled to grab their bags, no one noticed. A group of men had silently infiltrated the terminal, and within minutes, the entire airport would be under their control. Asterisk, no one noticed when they first walked in. Just a few men, hoodies pulled low, carrying bags that looked a little too heavy for hand luggage. Airports are full of distractions, rolling suitcases, crying toddlers, overhead announcements blaring about delayed flights, and that's exactly why it was the perfect place for them to strike. I'm Emily Parker. I've spent most of my life in the line of duty, a SWAT officer trained to keep calm when everything around me falls apart. But that night still haunts me, because the moment those men dropped their bags and pulled out rifles, the entire terminal changed. 1 second, it was just another busy evening, families rushing to make connections, business travelers glued to their phones, the smell of coffee drifting from a kiosk near the gate. The next second, screams tore through the air, suitcases hit the floor, tickets scattered, and hundreds of lives were suddenly at the mercy of masked gunmen. I should have been off duty. My shift had technically ended an hour earlier. But I've learned that evil doesn't run on a schedule, and when it shows up, you don't get to ignore it. The leader was easy to spot, broad shoulders, commanding presence, a rifle held with the confidence of someone who had done this before. He barked out orders in a heavy accent. Everyone down now. His voice cut through the chaos like a knife. People dropped to the floor instantly, covering their heads, clinging to their children. And me, I was trapped in the middle of it. My weapon was still holstered inside my bag, but my training had already kicked in. The first rule in situations like this: observe everything. Details save lives. I noticed the way the leader scanned the room, not panicked, not rushed. He had a plan. The 2 men beside him fanned out, corralling the crowd into one corner. Another lingered near the main doors, keeping watch. That told me something important. They weren't here for a quick smash. This was bigger. This was organized. As I crouched low, pretending to shield myself like everyone else, I slipped my hand toward my bag. My fingers brushed the cool metal of my sidearm, hidden beneath clothes and paperwork. But I couldn't draw yet, not with rifles pointed directly at terrified civilians. One wrong move, and bodies would start hitting the floor. Then it happened. The leader grabbed a man from the crowd, young, maybe mid-20s, dressed in a business suit. He yanked him forward by the collar and shoved the barrel of his rifle against his head. The man froze, trembling, eyes wide with shock. The terminal went silent. You could hear the echo of the announcement system cutting off mid. Even the children stopped crying, as if they understood the deadly weight of that moment. Listen to me, the leader shouted. Flights are grounded. Police stay away. If anyone moves, he dies. His words ricocheted through the terminal, and in that instant, I knew this wasn't random. This was a calculated assault, possibly terrorism, possibly extortion. Whatever it was, I couldn't just wait for backup. I pressed the button on my earpiece, speaking low and fast. This is Parker. Terminal 3 is under armed assault. Multiple hostiles, heavy weapons, hostages taken. I need immediate response. Did anyone hear me? I didn't know, but I wasn't about to sit back and hope. I shifted slightly, scanning the room for opportunities. That's when I saw her, a mother, huddled on the floor with her toddler pressed tight against her chest. The child's lips trembled, but no sound came out. The mother's eyes, wide, desperate, locked on mine for just a second. And in that look, I remembered why I wore the badge, why I endured the grueling training, the endless drills, the sleepless nights, to protect people like her, to make sure fear didn't win. The leader barked another order. One of his men swung his weapon, motioning for the hostages to line up against the far wall. Dozens of bodies shuffled, heads low, sobs breaking the silence. My heart pounded, but my hands stayed steady. That's what years in SWAT do to you. Adrenaline surges, but you learn to ride it, to control it. Every muscle was coiled, waiting for the right second to strike. Then, from the far side of the crowd, I caught a glimpse of someone moving differently, a tall figure in a dark jacket. At first, I thought he was just another hostage, but then I recognized his walk. Mark, my teammate. Somehow, he'd managed to slip inside undetected. Our eyes met, just 1 second of contact, but it was enough. In SWAT, words aren't always necessary. We had trained for this exact kind of unspoken coordination. He'd circle wide to the right, I'd take the left, and when the moment came, we'd move as one. But the leader wasn't giving us much time. He tightened his grip on the trembling hostage, pressing the barrel harder against his skull. Your police better stay out. You have 5 minutes, he shouted, 5 minutes, that was all we had before he made good on his threat. And if one life ended, panic would erupt, turning the terminal into a massacre. I exhaled slowly, my finger slid against the trigger of my sidearm. Still hidden, the whole world narrowed to a single point, the masked man holding a gun to an innocent life. This was it. The next choice I made would decide whether dozens lived or died. And in the deadly stillness of Terminal 3, I was about to pull the trigger. When Mark's eyes met mine, something quiet passed between us. No words, no fake bravado. Just the wiring of two people who'd kept each other alive through too many nights. He shifted, melted into the crowd, and began edging toward the service corridor by Gate C. I watched his movement and charted the room in my head. Exits, columns, the position of each unknown attacker. I counted less than 2 heartbeats to act and more than a dozen lives on the line. The leader barked out orders in clipped bursts. His men moved with a purpose that made my skin go cold. They weren't amateurs. One of the gunmen clamped down on the body of the man they'd seized, using him as human armor, while another prowled toward the check-in counters, rifling through tills and tossing cash into a military-style duffel. A third man planted something behind the information desk. I couldn't tell in that blur of movement if it was a camera or a bomb, but either option meant he wanted leverage. I slid my hand deeper into the pocket and felt the cold of my sidearm. The tenths of seconds that followed felt like a world apart. You learn to compress time in training, to make decisions at the speed of instinct while your mind catalogs every variable. Which hostage would I risk? Which shooter could I neutralize without turning the terminal into an execution ground? Mark crept along the shadows and found cover behind a pillar near the retail island. He gave me the single tap on his helmet we used for ready. I tapped back. That small exchange sharpened everything. We were coordinated. We could do this without soldiers running in and spraying bullets blind. Across from me, the leader stomped toward the central concourse, rifle in hand, and dragged the hostage to the middle of the open space like a grotesque puppet. He wanted an audience. He wanted fear to feel theatrical. He raised the barrel deliberately, sweeping the room until his gaze found mine. He spoke not at me but at the noise, the cameras, the crowd. You listen to me. No cops, no tricks. 5 minutes. You move, he dies. The public address system coughed to life. Someone kicked the console and a flight announcement tried to bleed through the panic. The sound only underscored the surrealness. Holiday music had been replaced by the heavy breathing of someone about to execute a plan. I had one clear window. The leader's posture was rigid, the rifle clamped close to the victim's skull. His eyes flicked to the left, checking to see if any visible enemies were approaching. That's when I used the only real advantage I had: unpredictability. I moved like a ghost, not running, not obviously positioning myself, just a shift, a inching sideways that blended into the body language of someone falling apart. A mother wept beside me, so I crouched and pretended to cry too. In training, they teach you concealment can be emotional as well as physical. If the enemy believes you are a victim, they might lose focus. He did. Mark's side of the plan fell into place. He triggered a small flash to the right, a distraction, a bright pop followed by a reflected strobe of light across the gift shop windows. The leader's head snapped toward the commotion. His men turned to see. That was my opening. I lunged like someone who had nothing left to lose. Not a sprint, a catapult. I dove toward the leader and the hostage, my palms slamming into the leader's rifle to jar it, my legs sliding under the prize. I felt the heat of the barrel against my forearm and the brittle rasp of the rifle strap under my fingers. Time collapsed into sensation. The sickening smell of cordite, the hard thud of my shoulder hitting the polished floor, the way the hostage went loose and stumbled free. The leader twisted, tried to fire over my arm, and that's the second I felt Mark on my back. He pressed into me, 2 hands working like the pair of a machine to pin the man's firing shoulder down. We rolled, a brief tangle of limbs, leather, and adrenaline. The leader tried to jab his elbow into my face. I took the hit. Pain blossomed, bright and immediate, but I didn't let go. Somewhere to my left, a gunshot cracked and a shoulder of merchandise exploded into dust. The shooter who'd planted himself near Gate B had taken a wound from a precise, practiced shot from an officer outside. A ripple of hope washed through me, and is dangerous because hope can make you reckless. I shut it away and focused. Hands found the leader's mask. The world tunneled 2 fingers and the cold against silicone. I grabbed, Ripton. For a split second his eyes met mine, young, angry, alarmed. It wasn't the face of a poet or a villain in a movie. It was someone who'd chosen a path and found it closing in. Hold him, I hissed at Mark, who tightened like a vice. We wrestled him free of the rifle. He cursed in a foreign language and swung a boot at Mark's hip. I countered, uppercut, felt the metallic click as a tooth shattered. And then we had him cuffed by two of us, using everything left in our limbs. A second later, an officer stormed in through an emergency access with two more teammates behind him. The rest of Alpha Team, black and efficient. But the terminal was only half outside of the ring where my team now controlled the leader. Other shooters were still in pockets around the hall. The man at the cash counter, the one by the baggage carousel, a lurking figure by the restrooms. They watched, hungry for a chance to turn the tide. We radioed the command that the primary gunman was down. Parker, target, neutralized. Moving to clear the rest. Need medics and explosives sweep. My voice was a brick in my throat. I could hear officers calling out, checking IDs, lifting the bowels of abandoned suitcases. People sobbed, hugging each other. Babies screamed. The biggest problem after the initial takedown is always the unknown. Booby traps, hidden grenades, accomplices pretending to be hostages. I have a list of worst-case scenarios in my head, and they were all playing on repeat. That's when the bomb tech's voice came over my headset. Small and steady. Possible IED signal on smart frequency near check-in. We have to cordon the interior lane now. I felt every cell in my body tighten. The leader we'd detained was slumped now, cursing. But his eyes kept flicking to a slim form in the crowd. A woman with a red scarf. Something about that scarf had stood out to me earlier. She'd been near the leader, blending in as a passenger. Now she held a phone in both hands and spoke into it. Subtle, controlled. I tapped the technician and tipped them off. Red scarf, gate 12, watch close. They did. She tried to stand and move. Two officers approached with calm, professional patience. She raised her hands. The suspicion confirmed itself when she dropped an object, a small black cylinder that rolled and clicked. The tech was on it in 2 seconds flat with a robot arm and a charge to render it inert. It was one thing to capture a man and another to neutralize a plan that had a dozen moving pieces. Cartels and terracells don't leave a signature that's easy to read. They weave logistics into public life, into places that are, by nature, porous and chaotic. Airports are a perfect example. Identity is thin, movement is constant, and people expect a little disorder. That expectation is what attackers exploit. By the time medical personnel moved through the lines and the command had firm control of the immediate concourse, I felt drained, physically exhausted. Yes, but something else gnawed at me. When you put your hands on someone who is trying to take lives, there's a moment of intimacy you never pay dear. The close-up look at the human at the other end of the barrel. It doesn't make you soft. It just makes you complicated. Later, in the debrief, someone would call the actions heroic and seamless. In that hallway, with bloodied tile and abandoned luggage under our boots, it was neither heroic nor seamless. It was necessity and training and luck braided into a decision that prevented dozens of deaths. But even as I let myself exhale, as we moved hostages to safety in medics triage, I could feel the edges of the night still bristling with business left unfinished. Because a leader's capture is a lead, not a closure. There are questions that still throbbed. Who supplied the weaponry? Who rented the fake IDs? Was it an isolated cell or part of a larger plan? And most of all, how many more are out there waiting for nightfall to strike again? We had the immediate outcome. Hostages alive, primary gunmen in custody, secondary threats contained. But the airport was a body with a pulse that would keep beating long after we left. Finances, logistics, and possible cartel ties needed interrogation. Intelligence would have to follow and follow hard. For now, though the focus was on the living, mothers clutched children and wept. Strangers embraced like kin. Officers handed out blankets, water, simple human stabilizer. Someone from media shoved a microphone toward me. The string of questions muffled into canned sound bites. Officer Parker, tell us, how did this happen? Were you scared? I thought of the toddler's face, the shaking of the man used as a shield, Mark's steady jaw. I thought of the little things that teach you courage, not fame, not medals, the tiny details like a small hand finding yours in the dark. I answered, but the words felt insufficient. We acted. People are safe. That would be in the headlines by morning, but it would never capture the real, raw minutes in the lull between threat and response, the things that slip into your bones, the bad breath of terror, the sweat of 1,000 breaths. the olfactory map of an event that never washes away. We led the last flock of hostages through the temporary triage tent, each face marked with trauma and relief in equal measure. In the medic's tent, I saw the teenage robber weed cuffed sitting against a crate, head bowed, cuffed, and breathing too fast. He had a cut at his eyebrow, a hemorrhage blossoming on his temple. Someone was trying to save him, not because he deserved it, but because that's the rule of engagement now. You secure, and then you save. Later, I would sit with Mark and the rest of the team for the formal debrief. Our commanders would ask for timelines, sequences, specific verbiage for the report. I would give them what they needed. Timestamps, positions, engagement, rationale. The paperwork is part of the job. The paper makes the reality legible to a system that prefers boxers checked. But in the corridor, before the papers, Mark and I shared a look that said more than ink ever could. No one else saw him tense his hand and give me a small, grim smile. That smile said, "We kept them alive." That smile said, "We are still here." And for a second, that was enough. Asterisk, the silence after a crisis is never truly silence. It's a patchwork of sounds, boots crunching glass, radios hissing with half-finished orders, civilians sobbing quietly into each other's shoulders. My ears rang with phantom gunfire, the kind that sticks with you long after the bullets stop flying. And in that moment, as medics ferried out the last wounded, I realized the fight wasn't over. The leader sat cuffed against a support column, his chest rising and falling like a piston. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth where my fist had landed. His mask lay shredded at his feet, the elastic snapped like a broken promise. His men were either dead, wounded, or in custody. On paper, it was a victory, but I couldn't shake the gnawing sense that he wasn't the type to gamble it all on one operation. This was a probe, a test. I crouched in front of him, close enough to see the defiance etched in his eyes. "You're going to tell us who you're working for," I said quietly, my voice low enough that only he could hear. His lips curled into something between a sneer and a smirk. "You think you've won," he rasped, his accent heavy. "This is nothing, just a message." A chill raced down my spine. Messages meant more was coming. We moved him to an armored transport within minutes, sirens wailing as the convoy sped toward the federal facility downtown. Mark rode with him, his weapon trained on the prisoner the entire time. I stayed back to oversee the terminal cleanup, to give the press something to gnaw on so they wouldn't chase the convoy. Reporters swarmed like moths to a flame, shouting questions that barely made sense in their frenzy. "How many dead? Who are they? Is this cart?" I gave the official lines, the kind that hold just enough truth to keep the wolves at bay. But every word felt hollow in my mouth, because the truth, the real truth, wasn't mine to share yet. Hours later, when I finally walked into the interrogation wing, Mark was already there, leaning against the wall with that same tired determination etched across his face. The leader sat shackled to a steel chair, under a harsh fluorescent light that made his skin look waxy. A translator was on standby, but the man spoke English well enough. The first hour was nothing but stonewalling. He spat at the floor, laughed when questions got too close to something real. He toyed with us, playing the role of the unbreakable soldier. But I've learned over the years that no one is truly unbreakable. Everyone has a crack, you just have to find it. I leaned forward, folded my arms on the metal table, and locked eyes with him. "You used civilians as shields," I said. "You planted explosives in a public terminal. You made children stare down the barrel of a gun. You think that makes you strong. To me, that makes you pathetic." For the first time, his jaw twitched. Not much, but enough. Mark caught it too. We were in, piece by piece. Over the next 2 hours, he let things slip. A name here, a location there. He mentioned the shipment more than once, like it was a holy grail they were desperate to protect. He claimed it wasn't drugs, wasn't money, it was something bigger. I'd heard that phrase too many times in my career, and it never ended well. Finally, with sweat dripping down his temples, he said a phrase that froze the room. "They'll light up the sky if you don't stop it." I asked him what that meant. He smiled, lips cracked and bleeding, and whispered, "Ask your own government." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just a cartel hit or a robbery gone wrong. This was something larger, something designed to send ripples far beyond one airport. And if his words were true, we were sitting on a ticking clock. Walking out of that room, Mark placed a hand on my shoulder. "You think he's bluffing?" I shook my head. No, he wanted us to hear that. He wanted it to echo, and echo it did. That night, as I sat in the dim glow of my kitchen lamp, sipping coffee that tasted like ash, I couldn't stop thinking about his words. They'll light up the sky. I didn't know if he meant bombs, planes, or something darker. But I knew one thing. We weren't done. Sleep didn't come that night. It rarely does, after the kind of day that leaves your ears ringing and your hands stained with other people's blood. I sat at my kitchen table, replaying the leader's words over and over again in my head. They'll light up the sky. At 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. Mark's name glowed on the screen. No greeting, no wasted words. We've got something. Get dressed. By 4 a.m., I was back in the command van, screens flickering with drone feeds, satellite images, and encrypted chatter. Analysts pieced together fragments from the interrogation phrases, names, coded references. One name surfaced more than once. Sombra Shadow, a cartel handler we'd heard rumors about but never pinned down. If this man was involved, then the airport siege was only the opening act. Mark pointed at a grainy aerial shot of a warehouse near the docks. That's our best lead. Heat signatures say it's not just storage. Too many bodies moving inside. Too much activity at night. Could be nothing, I muttered. He gave me that look, the one that says, you don't really believe that we rolled out before dawn. The city was still asleep, streets slick with last night's rain. Our convoy crawled through industrial blocks, engines low, lights off. Every nerve in my body buzzed with that mix of adrenaline and exhaustion that feels like being half asleep on a battlefield. We breached just before sunrise. The steel doors groaned under the charge, dust exploding as we stormed inside. For a heartbeat, it felt empty. Then the gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through crates and steel beams, sparks raining from shattered lamps. The first man I saw went down in a heap, his rifle clattering across the concrete. Shouts in Spanish echoed through the cavernous space. Orders barked sharp and fast. These weren't just smugglers, they were trained, disciplined bark. Mark moved like a machine, cutting corners, returning fire with precision bursts. I dove behind a forklift, heart hammering as splinters peppered my jacket. My return shots found one target, then another, but the fight wasn't balanced. We were outnumbered, and they were dug in. And then I saw her. Not Sombra, not the leader from the airport, but a woman. Blonde hair tied back, movements, sharp eyes like ice. She wasn't firing blindly like the others. She was orchestrating. Every nod, every gesture, shifted her men into better positions. When our eyes locked, it was like the room froze for half a second. Then she shouted something I couldn't catch, and half the warehouse detonated in smoke. By the time the haze cleared, most of them were gone, slipped through hidden exits, leaving behind nothing but shell casings and a half-empty cache of weapons. But the woman's face, it burned into my memory. She wasn't just muscle. She was strategy, control, power, and she had slipped through my fingers. Mark slammed his fist against a crate. They knew we were coming. Someone tipped them. I scanned the wreckage, my ears still ringing. No, this wasn't a tip. This was theater. They wanted us here. He frowned. For what? I bent down, running my fingers over a blackened piece of debris, a military-grade jammer, scorched but unmistakable, and next to it a small flash drive, half melted from the blast, but intact enough to recover. They wanted us to find this, I said softly. This is the message. Hours later, back in the command center, technicians worked furiously to pull data from the drive. Most of it was corrupted, but fragments emerged. GPS coordinates, dates, a single phrase embedded in the metadata. The sky will burn. When the analyst read those words aloud, the room went quiet. I glanced at Mark. His jaw was clenched tight, eyes scanning the screen like he could will it to give us more. We don't have weeks, I said. We don't have days. Whatever this is, it's coming fast. And for the first time since the airport siege, I felt it deep in my bones. We weren't chasing shadows anymore. The shadows were moving toward us. The GPS coordinates from the half-melted drive led us to a place that didn't make sense at first. A sleepy coastal city, 300 miles south, known more for its seafood markets and tourist boardwalk than anything resembling a cartel stronghold. On paper, it was quiet, safe, forgettable. But the moment I stepped off the transport van, I felt it in my gut. Something was wrong here. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Gulls wheeling overhead as fishermen unloaded crates from battered boats. Life moved on as if nothing was amiss. Kids running along the pier, couples sipping coffee at seaside cafes, but behind that everyday rhythm, there was an undercurrent, a tension. People turned their heads too quickly when uniforms passed. Windows slammed shut at the sound of our boots. This wasn't a town, it was a stage, and we had just stepped into the play. We set up shop in a rented storefront near the docks. From there, Mark and I studied the fragments of intel we'd salvaged, times, dates, coordinates, all pointing to a single night, just 2 days away. And then, there was that haunting phrase again, the sky will burn. What does that even mean? Mark muttered, his hands digging through his hair as he paced the room. I stared at the board we'd plastered with photos, maps, and red string that crisscrossed like veins. It means spectacle. They're not planning to disappear quietly. They want to make noise. They want the world watching. He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. Emily, if they're aiming for the sky planes. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion. We coordinated with aviation authorities immediately. Every airport within 200 miles was warned. Extra patrols were dispatched. Undercover agents placed among passengers, but there were too many possibilities, too many variables. We couldn't spread ourselves thin across every tarmac and runway dots, so we hunted for the woman. Instead, the blonde strategist who had orchestrated the warehouse escape. She was the key. Find her, and we'd find the plan. Leads came slow, but one finally broke through late that night. A dock worker reported seeing a woman matching her description boarding a rusted freighter under cover of darkness. Destination unknown, cargo unregistered, crew paid in cash. We moved before dawn, slipping into the shadows of shipping containers stacked like tombstones. The freighter loomed ahead, lights dimmed, engines rumbling low. I led the breach team, rifle snug against my shoulder, every sense alive. The steel ramp clanged under our boots as we climbed. A guard spotted us, reaching for his weapon, but Mark dropped him before he could fire. The sound echoed into the night, setting off a chain reaction. Shouts in Spanish, boots pounding metal stairs, the ship coming alive like a waking beast. We stormed the deck, gunfire flashing against the darkness, the air thick with smoke and salt. My ears rang, my throat burned, but my focus never wavered. Room by room, corridor by corridor, we fought our way down into the belly of the freighter. And then we found it. At first it looked like a storage hold, but instead of crates of fish or steel, the walls were lined with missile tubes, portable launchers, enough to turn a passenger plane into a fireball midair. And in the center, standing calm amid the chaos, was her, the woman, the blonde strategist. She wasn't holding a weapon this time. She didn't need to. Her presence alone controlled the room. Her eyes found mine, and for a split second, it felt like we were the only two people on that ship. You're too late, she said in flawless English, her voice carrying above the gunfire. The sky will burn, and there's nothing you can do. I raised my rifle, my finger tightening on the trigger, but before I could act, she detonated a charge. The blast threw me backward, heat and flame engulfing the room. The shockwave rattled my teeth, the world spinning into fire and steel. When I came to, alarms were screaming. The freighter was sinking, water pouring into ruptured hulls. My team was scattered, some dragging the wounded, others firing blindly as enemies fled into speedboats. And the woman, she was gone again. We barely made it off that ship alive. By sunrise, the freighter was nothing but twisted metal sinking into the sea, taking most of the evidence with it. But not everything was lost. Among the wreckage, Mark pulled a waterproof case, scorched but sealed. Inside, documents, schedules, flight numbers. One stood out, Flight 782, a commercial passenger plane scheduled to depart in less than 48 hours, carrying over 200 souls. I stared at the manifest, my stomach tightening like a fist. This wasn't just a cartel making noise, this was a cartel declaring war. That night, back in our makeshift command post, I recorded a voice log, something I do when the weight of the mission feels heavier than I can carry. They're always one step ahead, always slipping away when I get too close. But this time it's different. This time, it's not about territory or money. It's about fear, about showing the world they can burn the sky above us, and I won't let that happen, even if it costs me everything. I stopped the recorder, my hands trembling, breaths sharp. Outside, gulls cried over the harbor, waves slapping against rotting wood. The city was still asleep, unaware of the storm coming for it. And me, I was already running out of time. The clock was ticking. 40 hours until Flight 782 lifted off. carrying more than 200 unsuspecting passengers. And somewhere out there, the cartel's plan was still in motion. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blonde strategist's face, calm, confident, almost taunting. She wanted me chasing shadows. She wanted me tired, second-guessing. That was her weapon. By morning, our analysts pieced together scraps of intel from the freighter documents. One clue stood out: a shipment of catering supplies, rerouted through a shell company with ties to the cartel. Not food, not beverages, something else. Airline catering trucks. It clicked instantly. They had the perfect cover. No one questions a food truck pulling up to a plane. Mock slapped the report onto the table, his eyes wide. Emily, if they get those launchers onto the runway hidden in catering trucks, they don't even need to sneak explosives past security. I finished. My throat was dry. They could bring the sky down from the ground. We coordinated with airport security, FBI liaisons, and Homeland. It became a race against time. Every truck, every vendor, every crate, checked and double-checked. But paranoia has a way of breeding mistakes, and mistakes in our line of work get people killed. On the second day, just before dawn, a call came through. 3 unmarked catering trucks had bypassed inspection at a rural checkpoint. Destination, the same city where Flight 782 was scheduled for departure. That was our break. That was the trail. We rolled out in a convoy, sirens off, engines growling low. The highway stretched ahead, empty except for the faint glow of taillights in the distance. Visual confirmed. Our driver whispered into COMMS.3 trucks. Boxy, white, unremarkable. They could have been delivering donuts, but I knew better. I leaned forward, rifle across my lap, pulse steady but strong. This is it. We don't get a second shot. The takedown was fast and violent. We boxed the trucks in, lights flaring, doors slamming open. Federal agents step out of the vehicle. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then chaos. Gunfire erupted from the lead truck, windshield shattering outward. One of our SUVs swerved hard, tires screeching. I dove out, hit the pavement, and returned fire. Sparks flew from the truck's sides as bullets tore into steel. Smoke filled the air, horns blaring, drivers shouting in Spanish. I sprinted to the nearest truck, yanked the door open, and came face to face with him. A young man, barely 20, hands shaking as he raised his pistol. His eyes weren't full of hate, they were full of fear. "Don't," I said, my voice steady but low. "You don't have to die here." For a second, I thought he might drop the weapon, but desperation won. He pulled the trigger. Mine fired first. The sound was deafening. He slumped, gun clattering to the floor. My stomach twisted, but I didn't have time to feel it. The mission came first, always. When the smoke cleared, 2 of the trucks were secure. The third gone. It had slipped past in the chaos, speeding toward the city. Inside the captured trucks, we found what we feared: portable missile launchers, disguised in catering containers, enough firepower to bring down a plane at takeoff. But the third truck was still out there, and Flight 782 was less than 12 hours away. We pushed into overdrive. Roadblocks went up across the city. Choppers scanned highways with infrared. Every cop, every agent, every set of eyes was mobilized. Still, hours passed with nothing. The truck had vanished. Mark slammed his fist against the table. "It's like it disappeared into thin air." "No," I said quietly, staring at the flight schedule pinned on the wall. "It didn't disappear. It's already where it needs to be." And that's when the realization hit me like a hammer. They weren't coming for the airport. They were already inside it. We mobilized instantly, racing toward the terminal just as the sun began to rise. The airfield was alive with morning traffic, planes taxiing, luggage carts weaving, families lining up at check-in counters. And somewhere among all that ordinary chaos was a truck carrying death. I adjusted my vest, tightened my grip on the rifle, and looked at my team. No mistakes. Not today. We stopped them here, or hundreds of lives burn with that plane. As we stormed into the terminal, I couldn't help but hear her voice again in my head, the strategist's whisper like smoke. "The sky will burn." The terminal was chaos. Families screaming, alarms blaring, security scrambling, and there, at the far end of the loading bay, the third catering truck sat like a wolf in sheep's clothing. We moved fast. My boots pounded against the polished floor as I cut through panicked crowds. Mark's voice echoed in my earpiece. "Emily, left flank, now." I swung wide, rifle up, and saw her. The strategist, blonde hair pulled tight, eyes cold, standing in front of the truck like it was her throne. Too late, she hissed, her hand hovering over a detonator. My breath slowed. The world narrowed to her thumb and that tiny black button. Listen to me, I called out. Steady, loud enough to cut through the chaos. You push that. You don't win, you just die. And everyone remembers you as the monster who murdered children in an airport. For a split second, her mask cracked, doubt flickered, then she sneered, lifting her handbang. Mark's shot hit the detonator clean, sending it spinning harmlessly across the floor. I surged forward, tackled her hard, and the fight was over in seconds. The truck was secured. The passengers of Flight 782 boarded safely. The city lived to breathe another sunrise. Thank you for listening to our story. You can subscribe to our channel to listen to stories told by a former SWAT police officer.